Digimon Seekers, the dark and mature Digimon story starring adult tamers meant for adult fans, has officially wrapped just under a year after its premiere. Made up of 4 parts, or chapters, I shared my honest review of part 1 back in May 2023 when I had covered the 14 or so entries available at the time. Back then I called it a darker, edgier Digimon story with a clear love of the legacy of Digimon, particularly the virtual pets. I said that there was a lot to like, but I believed that the Seekers format, its rollout, and its budget were significantly hindering the project's potential for success. I said that chapter 1 took too long to get going, that the story was dragging, and importantly, that the poor machine translation was a brutal obstacle for non-Japanese fans to overcome. At the time, I could not recommend Digimon Seekers to anybody based on the first chapter, Act 1, and I recommended those interested in a more mature Digimon story check out Cyber Sleuth or Survive instead. But that was May 2023 when only one part had been released. Now that Seekers is concluded with 4 of 4 chapters readily available, I want to give you an updated, honest, and complete review of Digimon Seekers. I've now finished Digimon Seekers, reading parts 2, 3, and 4 at my own pace over a couple weeks here, and I have to say my impression of Seekers has improved drastically. This completed project is a much better story and a much better package than what the first 14 releases led me to believe, but that still doesn't mean I take back what I said or that I can recommend this to everybody now. So what's changed? Off the bat, the formatting and English translation saw a marked improvement the moment part 2 began. It was honestly quite jarring to go from chapter 1.18 to 2.1 and feel like I had moved from reading something that Google Translate spit out to something with a human touch and often a poetic way with words. While parts 2 through 4 are way better than part 1 in terms of readability, it should be said that the quality of writing is still far below what you'd get from the average actual novel. And while I've heard people defend Seekers by saying this is just how light novels and web novels are written, I think that's a disservice and kind of an insult to light novels and web novels, which can be quite well written. So acknowledging those writing and translation improvements in part 2 onwards, it does boggle the mind that whoever was in charge never approved going back to rewrite or redo the translation for Act 1. As of Saturday, March 2nd, 2024, the English version of Seekers Chapter 1 is just as robotic and cold as it was when it released in April 2023. Frankly, if I didn't host a YouTube channel that often talks Digimon, I would have dropped Seekers during Chapter 1 and never looked back because I thought the formatting was so brutal. I only found out how much better the English writing / translation got because I was determined to do this follow-up video. Seekers is like if there was a video game where the opening hours were hated by just about everybody and the developers updated the game to include great middle and end game content. That new stuff would serve the small portion of players who soldiered through the game's brutal opening, but if you never rework the opening hours, nobody is going to want to keep playing to get to the great middle and end game content. So I still believe the format, the rollout, and the budget, these things still sabotaged Seekers. But whereas I once said I found a good amount of things to like but not a lot to love, I can now say there is a lot that I loved with chapters 2, 3, and 4 of Seekers. The world scenario. Seekers is loaded with great concepts. I'll touch on these lightly and vaguely where necessary to avoid spoilers. One of my favorite Seekers concepts is the idea of nation states having mega-level Digimon in their weapons arsenal. These digital monsters are full-on weapons of war. There are these Cold War feeling tensions where Nation X will compete with Nation Y over who has control of the strongest mega-level Digimon, both for national defense and to flex their muscles on the global stage. Digimon are nuclear weapons basically, and I thought that was really interesting. I also found there was a great set of rules for how Digivolution works in this universe, and an interesting risk-reward component to it all. Mind linking is key to this story. Select characters like our protagonist, Eiji, almost telepathically pilot their Digimon, experiencing the digital world through their Digimon's eyes via mind link, but there is a time limit to how long you can stay mind linked, and the stronger the Digimon gets, the less time you have, so you can mind link to a rookie longer than a champion or an ultimate, for instance. As a result, characters will end up budgeting their mind link time by staying in lower forms as long as possible and only using evolution when they absolutely have to. It results in great scenarios and solves the decades-long question of, well, once you have Ultimate or Mega, why not just Digivolve straight to Mega? Why are Digimon characters always starting battles in their lower forms? Humans who mind link must also track and factor in the caution line and the limit line. If they go over the limit line, they could go DMIA, digitally missing in action, with their consciousness lost in the digital world and their human bodies falling into a comatose state. It can be really hard to create stakes for the human characters in a Digimon story, especially when all the action is digital and they're not the ones getting hurt. But here, with the limit line, going digitally missing in action, there are real stakes. This is seriously interesting stuff for a Digimon story, and it's kind of shocking that 25 years into the franchise, we haven't done this specific take until Seekers. I was pleasantly surprised, but also kind of heartbroken that this story became the text-only web novel, and Ghost Game with its minimal story got the 67 episode anime. Seekers' version version of the digital world is also quite strong and shrouded in mystery. The human characters are compared to astronauts, deep-sea divers, pioneers, and it feels that way. A line I loved was, quote, "We think we've discovered the digital world, but what if we're the ones who've been discovered?" It's this cool science fiction sort of extraterrestrial question, like was contacting this unknown life form a mistake? Who holds the real power in this dynamic? And like Ghost Game, Seekers has a Black Agumon mystery teased throughout, but unlike Ghost Game, this Black Agumon story is actually rewarding and comes with a few great reveals, but I won't get too into that because of spoilers. When it comes to writing Digimon, I've noticed two schools of digi-thought. There are the stories that hone in on mythology, Digimon as Japanese yokai that humans interact with via technology, i.e. Digimon Survive or Digimon Adventure, and then there are stories that are interested in commentary on technology, contemporary tech and our relationship to it, more like Cyber Sleuth, Digimon Tamers, and now Seekers. Let's also talk the characters at the heart of Digimon Seekers. Much to my surprise, Seekers really is an adult Digimon story, even more than I expected. At 19 years old, Eiji is one of the youngest characters, with many of the key players being in their 30s, 40s, or even older. It's barely a young adult Digimon story, and it's more of a grown adult story. I had a soft spot for Eiji after chapter 1, but wasn't sold on him, whereas after finishing Seekers, I grew to really like this character. Eiji is a cheater, a loser, a dirty fighter in a lot of ways. His sort of rival character, the noble and just Leon, would be the easy choice for protagonist in another kind of Digimon story, and Eiji would be that slimy but lovable anti-hero rival. There's a bit where Leon and Eiji battle, and you think it's going to be Pulsemon versus Lugumon 1v1, but we see Eiji brings his Tyrannomon into the fight, making it 4v1. It was kind of fun rooting for the guy who's kind of cheating in what was supposed to be a 1v1. I liked following around someone who wasn't the perfect paragon of what an upstanding citizen should be, and him being a punk also allowed for a ton of room to grow, which Seekers did capitalize on in the end. There were a ton of standout Digimon too. I mentioned Black Agumon already, but this story has a great take on Pulsemon. Digimon Dreamers and its comedic Pulsemon are still pretty great, but just like Agumon can differ between adventure and savers and survive, this Pulsemon, dropped in a bit more serious of a story, is one that I enjoyed. Omegamon gets utilized well in this story too as this digital angel of death. We know very little about the Royal Knights in this story, and the less we're told about these demigods of destruction, the better. And with this great world scenario and these great characters, Seekers managed to catch me by surprise on more than one occasion. There are some great twists and turns in this story, and what I consider to be an excellent villain. I'm going to spend a bit of time on spoilers later in the video. I'll have timestamps on screen if you want to skip, and plenty of spoiler warnings, so don't worry. But for now, back to the delivery of Seekers. I know that superfans of Seekers will hate that I'm still laying into this point, but the formatting is such a missed opportunity even with the improvements I felt from Act 2 onwards. Occasionally, Seekers would be written quite elegantly with these real standout lines. For instance, there are these vortexes in the digital world and nobody knows what awaits you on the other end. A character warns Eiji, quote, "There's a story going around that says you'll catch a glimpse of the system administrator if you go through a vortex, but they say it kills you. You know, like all the old legends say, you burn up if you catch even a glimpse of the true face of God." I thought that line was sick as hell. Clearly well written in the native language and then translated into English pretty well. So that's good, but then Seekers will suddenly fall back to really broken English or be inconsistent with names and spelling, have bizarre formatting that appears to have never been reviewed by a human. As a reader, it calls into question if they even did add a human translator after part 2, or if the machine translation just got a bit better, or if my standards just got lower while reading. I don't think that last part is true, by the way. I do think something changed with part 2 onwards. But yeah, with these glaring formatting issues, you start to wonder if those banger lines, like the one about catching a glimpse of the true face of God, if those were just flukes, like a broken clock being right twice a day. Now, before I give you my verdict on Digimon Seekers and whether or not I recommend it in its March 2024 state, I want to quickly cover some spoilers, mainly so I can praise the story. I think this will take a minute or less. If you want to skip ahead, I also have timestamps on screen right now on where to skip, so if you don't want spoilers, I'll see you on the other end of this section. I mentioned twists, and I mentioned a great villain. Professor Ryu Senji being the mastermind villain is excellent. This is the professor who gifted Eiji his Lugumon at the start of the story, like a Pokemon professor who lets you choose your starter. Imagine if Professor Oak was the secret villain of Pokemon Red and Blue, and he set you, a naive kid, out into the world to power up your starter Pokemon for him, to catalog and catch Pokemon so that he could use that information for evil. That's pretty much what happens in Seekers, and it's incredible. Ryu Senji connects all of those adult characters I mentioned, having used multiple groups of friends over a decades-long scheme. It feels a bit like Kingdom Hearts and the trios in that series, where we have the current Sora, Riku, Kairi trio, but a decade or so prior there were the Ventus, Terra, and Aqua trio, who met with a terrible fate. We talked about Eiji being a loser and how I thought this worked, but we also learned near the end of the story that Ryu Senji hand-picked Eiji because he was a loser and a nobody. Eiji had no family, no friends, no job, and so he couldn't really tell anybody what was going on, and if one day he mysteriously vanished, nobody would notice the missing person. person. He was the perfect victim, a ghost that nobody would miss. This is great stuff, seriously. Alright, so spoilers are ending now. So what's my final verdict on Digimon Seekers, and can I recommend it? I can say confidently I like Digimon Seekers infinitely more now having finished it than I did last year. I think it has one of modern Digimon's best stories, up there with my favorites, Appmon and Digimon Survive. But still, I just can't recommend Digimon Seekers to anyone that isn't a Digimon superfan due to its brutal format and the lack of care shown in its official translation. Let me be clear, I'm not even saying this needed to be an anime or a game to be worth engaging with. I think the Japanese language audio drama version sounds really cool, where the voice actor for Gamamon narrated it while there was background noises like subway train tracks and explosion sounds. I love a narrative podcast production, and if we got that in English, I would recommend this product in a heartbeat. Imagine if they hired Joshua Seth, the voice of Ty, or Laura Jill Miller, Kari's original VA, to do the narration, or if this was an actual novel made available with a named English translator and was released in one package, I would totally recommend this. I'd love to have an official Digimon novel in the English language to flip through and put on my shelf when I was done. As it stands, as a text-based, poorly translated series of web pages on Digimon.net, I can only recommend Seekers to the most hardcore Digimon fans who also like reading fiction. In the rare chance that they announce Digimon Seekers is getting a manga adaptation or an English audio drama like the one they made for the Japanese language, I'll be all over social media recommending the hell out of Digimon Seekers to anyone who will listen. But media matters, formatting matters, and while I enjoyed what Seekers gave me, it's not something I can recommend to anyone but Digimon diehards. Thanks so much for listening to my review. If you enjoyed it and you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel as our next milestone is 50,000 subscribers. My next video is going to be on Beyblade's Asia tournament arc from the original series back in the day. In case you missed my first video on Beyblade Series 1, I'll link to that below and on screen now. I'm doing this little Beyblade original series run here, reviewing one arc at a time. Thanks for watching, have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.